This happened when I was 19 and naive. My friends and I were walking home after a night of partying and decided we didn't want to wait until we got to my friend's house to smoke a joint. I was the only girl, and for some reason I decided to dress up that night: skirt, beaded sequin shirt, and heels. I walked about 10 meters in front of my friends and asked literally every person if they had anything they could give us to smoke. It only took 4 people to oblige. Thank you, outfit, and a couple of guys in their mid-20s said they'd cover us. My friends came over, and somehow we decided to smoke at my friend's house, which, in some way, defeated the purpose of asking those good young men. But, well, we did it. We all went to my friend's house and smoked a joint. One of the guys seemed interested in me, and I was single and willing, so we exchanged information on Facebook. Many people know each other outside of the bars. The first thing that seemed strange to me was that even though he had introduced himself as Johnny, his name on Facebook was Reggie. When I asked him, he said that he was mostly estranged from his family and had chosen a name and surname that represented him more. His last name, which I chose, was that of a composer that I greatly admired, which did not generate distrust in me towards him. He used different names for different people, something I didn't think too much about, so we started hanging out. The second strange thing was that despite being estranged from his family, he lived with his uncle in a very nice condo. Johnny was 28 years old, if I remember correctly, and it bothered me a lot. The contemptuous way he treated his uncle who put him up in that beautiful apartment without charging him rent. Johnny was unemployed and did not have a college degree, although he claimed to have spent time in law school and had a very high opinion of himself. But I digress. He presented interesting music and we were having a good time, so I let it go. Once, while I was at his house, he had a big fight with his uncle. We weren't dating, but I thought we were friends, so I asked him if he wanted to talk about it. He flatly said no, but then he was quiet and in a bad mood the rest of the time I was there. Eventually, I had to take the last bus, and I announced I was leaving. He said he would walk me to the bus. While I got my things, he said, "I can't believe you didn't ask me," which I was completely taken aback by his change of attitude. They had never called me a witch before, at least not in my presence. I replied that I had asked him, but he had ignored me. He snorted and was silent during the 5-minute walk. He said, "Whatever," which I didn't need that. I texted him from the bus telling him that whatever we were doing was over and that he had no right to talk to me like that, especially when I had literally done nothing wrong. However, I had lent him sheet music that was very important to me and would be extremely expensive to replace. So, I asked him to return it to me once he could behave in a civilized manner. He responded the next day, apologizing to me, saying that he had taken out his frustrations on me and that it was not fair, and that I had every right not to want to see him again. He said he was moving that week, something he hadn't mentioned before, even though we saw each other a couple of times a week, and that once he settled, he would be happy to give my music back. A week later, he sent me a message again, saying that he had already moved and that I could pick up the sheet music whenever I wanted. We made a plan. His new place was quite close to my high school. I went to his new house and it was empty. It was a 2-story house with a basement in a not cheap area of the city, and he was still unemployed. He kept asking me what I thought and watched my face 100% of the time. The vibes were very strange. He just kept saying it was fine and other non-committal things. We never went to the second floor. Eventually, he said that the sheet music was in his room in the strange basement. But he insisted that I come down first because I was having the tour. The vibes were still weird. I went down to an unfinished basement. He told me to do a 180-degree turn at the bottom of the stairs. I didn't go into that room. It had a small step to a linoleum floor inside the room. The only piece of furniture I saw in the entire house was a bed frame without a mattress. His room. The only thing visible in the room was my sheet music, right inside from the open closet. He was still watching my face intensely. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something like, "You can grab it for me." He thought for a second. Then he came into the room, took the sheet music and handed it to me. I immediately turned around and basically ran up the stairs. Upstairs, I was literally about to say goodbye politely when he said, "Come on," chat for a minute, and sat down on the floor in the hallway. I was really bad at saying no at that point in my life, so I also slid over to the only available surface to sit down. He looked me directly in the eyes. The look in his eyes was half cold and distant, half euphoric. He asked me in a tone of contained emotion, "Have you lived a good life in the past?" I answered something like, "I think I am a good person, although I still have time to improve." I tried to pretend I wasn't upset. I honestly don't know what I did too well. I managed it on the inside. I was scared by the implication that my life was over, and because I was in that place, creepy, alone with a man who enjoyed causing me distress. I pulled out my phone and texted a message to my only friend with a car, who also knew Johnny had been weird with me lately. I sent him, "Help, pick me up at my school if I don't show up." Johnny did something to me. I kept chatting while doing this, changing the subject to something banal like the weather. As soon as I saw his first answer, I didn't even read it. I just started putting on my shoes and told Johnny I was leaving. "Go now? That's a bit rude," he said with a spark of anger breaking his strange, icy, and happy affection. "Yes, he's there waiting for me." "He's already there," I said, referring to my high school. "So you texted her to pick you up while we were chatting?" "We already had plans. She knows I was going to meet you." "Well, rude. Get out." "Okay, bye," I said and walked out, maintaining a semblance of control. I left and didn't look back with the sheet music in hand. Once I was a few houses away, I ran. The 15 minutes it took him to arrive were some of the most distressing of my life, and if he followed me and found me there waiting, he was very tall and obviously stronger than me, and he could have easily overpowered me if he had decided to. I felt stupid, ashamed, and scared. My friend got there as soon as possible. I deleted him from Facebook, and that was it. She moved to another part of the country, and I was left to process the events that had just unfolded. During my first year of college in New Hampshire, I worked at McDonald's. One night, a girl in my dorm accidentally started a small fire by leaving popcorn in the microwave for too long. It was around 3 a.m. when we all had to evacuate. Fire trucks arrived, and the police made quite a fuss about it. The girl who started the fire became the butt of many nasty jokes. I felt bad for her. She wasn't attractive and seemed pathetically lonely. Moreover, causing a fire in the microwave seemed like an innocent enough mistake to receive such cruel comments. A couple of days after the incident, I saw her in the hall of the dorm and started a casual conversation. Asking her how things were going and making a joke about how they were popping, she laughed, and that was it. A conversation that lasted about 2 minutes. Fast forward a week later, and I hear a knock on my bedroom door. The same girl, who I will now call Popcorn, literally runs into my room without hesitation. I had not even told her my room number, but at that moment, I assumed she had seen me come in once because she didn't even know my name at that point. It took me a second to realize that she was crying uncontrollably. Now, I had a stranger in my bed, crying, and I was like, then I consoled her, like the good-hearted person that I am, and asked her what was happening. She told me that the African-American cook in the dining room had attacked her, and that the university would not fire him. She was suffering emotionally, so being a victim of assault myself, I really sympathized and gave her my phone number in case she needed help walking to the dining hall with a safety net and those things. The night after our conversation, my roommate received a call from her, asking me to accompany her to the dining room because the cook who had attacked her was working that day. I accompanied her to eat, and she lit up like a glow stick. A new person emerged. It didn't matter that her attacker was in the room. She wouldn't stop talking to me about Pretty Little Liars, One Direction, and a lot of things that didn't really interest me. But again, I had no one to talk to, and the situation was complicated, so I just listened and nodded my head for about 2 weeks or so. I walked her to the dining room about 4 or 5 times. She may have been a victim of assault, but she was also a very annoying and unpleasant person. For God's sake, she really talked about herself in the third person. Her story about the assault started to become inconsistent, and there were always important new developments about what had happened. The story changed from an assault to a full-on gang situation as her story developed. One day, she made a comment like, she wished someone would drop a bomb on black people so they would finally learn to stop doing terrible things. That made me immediately uncomfortable and disturbed. I no longer wanted to walk with her or interact with her. The week of Thanksgiving, I went home to visit my family while Popcorn stayed on campus for that week. I had 60 missed calls from her in one day. I even had 20 calls in the span of a few hours. No normal person does that. The signs, the alert was definitely going on if they hadn't already. When I got back to campus, there was a knock on my door, and sure enough, it was Popcorn crying again. She told me that since I wasn't on campus to protect her, she was attacked by a Muslim guy while she was walking towards Panera Bread, and that a Filipino man had groped her and slapped her. Yes, before there were warning signs. These were sirens blaring. I'm not someone who justifies these cases, but the rate of attacks was exceptionally high, especially because these 3 attacks had happened in the span of a month, all by people of color. Seemingly at random, she was making up these stories to gain a sick kind of sympathy. As a real victim of assault, she was beyond offended. I told her I had to go to class and ran to ask a friend what I had to do. Things went crazy very quickly. I warned the residence hall officials about her, and they told me that they would talk to her. During class, I already had more than 100 missed calls and a series of individual messages saying that I was done with this, that I wanted to have nothing to do with her. I blocked her number and went back to my dorm. That week after school, I went straight to my room because I didn't want to see her. One day, I had to go to the bathroom, so I went to the cabin to relieve myself. I was there casually doing my business with my pants around my ankles when Popcorn literally crawled across the bathroom floor and stuck her head under the stall door, saying, "Ha! I knew you would eventually come out." I was terrified and almost in tears. I told her I was too busy and that I didn't have time for her, and it bothered me that she invaded my privacy like that. It was very difficult for me to say it because I had a very difficult time facing people. She told me she was thinking about dying because her mother had died when she was young. Some manipulative garbage. I was not in the mood. I left her in the bathroom and went back to my room and locked the door. I watched some videos on YouTube and took a nap when suddenly I was woken up by knocking. "Don't knock on my door." I didn't respond. The knocking continued and got louder. "Open this door or I'm going to kill you. Open this door or I'm going to kill you," she repeated over and over again. She waited outside my bedroom, singing songs and banging on the door for an hour. I was so scared. I just cried and called my dad to pick me up from school. I didn't have many friends who lived on campus since it was a small university, and many people traveled from home. This whole situation made me feel very isolated, and my mental health was deteriorating rapidly. The RAs were informed of the threats she made at my door by other students who saw what happened, and she received a warning, but that was it. One night, my boyfriend, who lived 3 hours away, came to spend the night at the university. We were watching a movie and taking a nap in my bed when suddenly we heard the door open. Like an idiot, I was completely distracted and forgot to lock the door. Popcorn ran in and jumped on us, saying in a childish voice, "Popcorn wants cuddles." I was completely horrified, basically yelling at my boyfriend, who has no patience for these situations. She told her to get out of my room immediately. She told her that she was just going to die like her mother when she was 3 years old and was going to get cancer injections. My boyfriend smiled and said, "Okay," and then he pushed her out of the room and closed the door. Slammed the door without caring at all. I would swear it almost crushed her fingers. I loved him for that. We reported her to the campus police in the morning, and nothing important happened after that incident until there was another fire in the dormitory caused by Popcorn. Not long after, they expelled her. I wish the story with her ended there, but unfortunately, not after she left the dorms. My life in the dorm became much easier, and I met a lot of normal and new people. I felt much less anxious. One day, a girl from one of my classes invited me to go to the mall with her to do my nails. This nail salon had clear glass, so you could see the rest of the mall from inside. I was relaxed when suddenly I see Popcorn's face pressed against the glass of the nail salon, and she was with a bearded and morbidly overweight man. I was doing my nails, and she was staring at me through the window for a good 10 minutes next to this man. To say I was nervous is an understatement. I told my friend what was happening, and we ran out from there, and they tried to follow us. In retrospect, that's when I should have called the real police. After the mall, I received a bunch of friend requests from profiles with a small Yorkie dog as the profile picture and several messages. I opened them, and they were about Popcorn, asking me to be her maid of honor at a wedding in Pahathat that she and her fiancé were having in 2 years. You can't make this stuff up. There was another message saying that she was really upset because I didn't say hello to her at the mall, and that she had been waiting so long to introduce me to her devoted fiancé. And she was so angry with me that she wanted to wring my neck. Of course, I blocked all those profiles and things calmed down a lot. I was living with my boyfriend and studying on Rat Island. I had been enjoying university for 2 years and was surrounded by a great group of friends. But about 5 months ago, I came home from work and had 3 missed calls from an unknown number in New Hampshire. Thinking it was one of my relatives, I called back, and it wasn't popcorn. On the other end of the line, I hung up immediately. There was also a voice message that was nothing more than someone breathing on the other end of the phone, telling me that I was invited to the wedding. I cried and called the police urgently to report the number. I don't know what happened or if something happened, but I haven't heard back about her since then. I am a very kind person, and people often take advantage of my openness. It really is a fatal flaw that I am working hard on. It is unfortunate that there are so many unbalanced and lonely people, but we really shouldn't make it their burden. Sometimes it can cause a lot of mental strain. I lived in Aberdeen, Scotland. I was a 24-year-old Scottish guy who shared a flat with a 27-year-old Romanian girl. We were cordial but not friends. On her birthday, she asked me if I wanted to go out for a few drinks with her and her friends. She worked in a very cheap and depressing strip club behind the bar, so she had free drinks. I already had plans, luckily, so I didn't go with her. I had been to that place with her before, and it was pretty dingy. Anyway, we both partied separately that night and got home a little drunk around 2:30 or 3 in the morning, grabbed some water, brushed our teeth, and went to bed. I woke up around 4 or 5 in the morning because of the sound of apartment doors opening and closing and what seemed to be someone staggering drunk. So I assumed that she was somewhat affected. I didn't give it much importance. After a while, I could hear her speaking in a low voice and in a tone more seriously. A man responded to her. I was a little surprised because he had never brought anyone back after going out. But hey, it was his birthday and I'm not one to judge. Just to make sure they knew they had woken me up and to try to avoid hearing something else, I did a fake cough loud enough so I wish they'd keep the noise down. I heard a door close and I thought, well, so I went back to sleep. We both slept late the next morning, but I was the first one up and started making breakfast in the kitchen. Eventually, she came looking terrible after having vomited in the bathroom. She started pouring herself water, and I happily asked her, "Did you have fun last night?" She responded somewhat vaguely, "Yes, it was good." And I, trying to joke, told her, "Come on, I know you brought a guy back." "Huh?" She went white as hell, paper surprised. She told me that hadn't really happened, confused by her reaction. I asked her what she meant, and she told me she thought it was a bad dream. It turns out she hadn't brought him back. He had followed her home. The lock on the entrance to our block floor was broken at that time. She had left the strip club after starting to feel very drunk and sick and had not closed the door to the apartment because she thought she was going to vomit. She ran to the bathroom, and when she returned to her room, she undressed and got into bed. She was almost asleep when she realized that she was not alone in her room. With difficulty, she managed to stammer out the question, "What do you want?" Alarmed, he answered quickly and loudly, "I just want water." She said, "I can bring you water," trying to stay calm with hope that the situation won't get worse. Then, my loud and hopefully masculine sound startled him, and the thought of there being another man in the apartment apparently scared him, as he then ran out of the room. Or maybe it was the fact that she wasn't there, unconscious. She quickly locked the door and went back to bed and fainted. I made her report the incident to the police. They immediately sent 2 officers who interviewed her and reviewed the security cameras. Apparently, it was not the first time this had happened in the area, and it looked like this man was preparing for some kind of attack. They said I was lucky I coughed and scared him, and they were also convinced that I had probably put something in her drink, but she didn't want to take a urine test. I think she had also been taking other things. They wanted to make sure that she hadn't invited him by mistake, and she pointed out that there was no chance of that since he wasn't her type. When they checked the security cameras, they could clearly see that he had followed her home, but they couldn't find out where he went when he left the apartment. So to that guy who was in my apartment one night uninvited, stay away. This happened around 2012. I lived in the industrial part of the city where there weren't many houses nearby, just warehouses, trains, and some businesses scattered about. Even during the day, it was strange to see people walking around unless they were going to or coming from the bus stop. One night, I was feeling down. Maybe my boyfriend and I had argued, or my roommates were bothering me. I decided that I needed to go for a walk. It was cold and late after midnight. I really needed fresh air and to be alone for a while. I was a 21-year-old girl who, at that point in life, wasn't very concerned about my own safety or well-being. I wouldn't say I thought I was invincible, but I definitely did some reckless and stupid things that I'm lucky to have come out of unscathed. This would be one of those times. I put on my long coat, combat boots, a big plush hat, and hurried out. There was nothing particularly picturesque or nice around, so I simply headed in the direction I knew best, towards the liquor store about 800 meters away. As I approached the store, I reached into my pocket and realized I had forgotten both my wallet and phone. Anyway, the store was closed, so I continued walking, still under the light of the neon signs of the liquor store. I heard a car approaching and slowing down. I looked over my shoulder and saw the tip of a Buick LeSabre from the 90s, similar to my boyfriend's, moving next to me. Relieved, I looked towards the driver's seat and saw a man who was definitely not my boyfriend. He rolled down the window and said, "Get in the car." He caught me completely off guard. I was in shock, confused, and honestly a little angry. What? No, wasn't my answer? As I kept walking, he kept the car pacing with me as I continued down the block. I looked at him several times and finally, I said, "Leave me alone, man." But he didn't do anything. He just stood next to me, looking at me with the window down. Suddenly, he accelerated, and I felt a wave of relief. I really didn't know what to do then, so I turned a corner and started walking on the opposite side of the street, back towards my house, towards the opposite lane. In case he came back, which he did, he would stop and then move forward slowly while I walked, muttering things all the time. He definitely seemed to think I was going to get in the car with him because he clearly wasn't taking no for an answer. This time, at least there was a full lane between us, but I really had nowhere to go if I decided to run home. There was only one way to get there, through the deserted industrial zone, following the path that passed under a tunnel under the train tracks. He could have easily followed me to the door without witnesses. There was a 24-hour convenience store about 1,600 meters in the other direction, but that was really my best option. I felt desperate. Suddenly, I heard the sound of people chatting in a building without a sign next to me. Without thinking twice, I pushed the door frantically and entered a scene that I will never forget. There were a group of sweaty men, smiling and talking to each other in Italian as they celebrated and finished their beers, putting away their ping-pong paddles. They all stopped and looked at me as I, tremblingly, exclaimed, "There is a man following me outside, and I am very scared." There was silence for a second as they looked at each other with distrust. But finally, one of them offered to take me home. I was so grateful to be in that stranger's car. A fancy car for a minute and a half. I kept apologizing and thanking him, and he just said, "Okay, be careful." I was probably thinking something like, "Girl, weirdo, who just broke into our weekly tournament. Please don't rob me." When I got home, I immediately looked up the number for the non-urgent police line, but decided not to call because, like I said, the guy was in a car, the same model, make, and color as my boyfriend's, and would probably be in the same area shortly after. Looking back, I probably should have made the call. When my boyfriend finally got home, he was furious with me for putting myself in that situation. What about the guy who tried to kidnap me so casually? Who does that? To give some context, I am a person in recovery from sex addiction. Before I got my head on straight, I went through episodes where I had many sexual partners. Eventually, that wasn't enough to satisfy my impulses, so I began to get involved in BDSM circles and activities. Naturally, I joined a fetish social network. I was quite surprised to find many medium-aged individuals looking to spice up their lives. They were usually quite vulgar. I matched with someone almost instantly, and he seemed peculiar and interesting. We talked for a week before organizing a meeting. I am from a small city, so it's not uncommon to have friends in common with people you know by chance. Turns out that this boy, whom we'll call Rob, sat next to one of my best friends at work. I also worked in that company, but in a different department. I told my friend Gary that I planned to meet with Rob, and he was a little concerned, saying that Rob was a bit socially awkward and didn't develop well in social situations. He told me that if it were another person, he would be more worried since he wasn't sure how they would take it. However, as I am quite rare, I didn't care about me. I thought it was important to mention it since when you know someone online, it's useful to have an idea of what they're like in social situations before you meet. We quickly moved forward to my appointment with Rob, and everything was going well. It was a bit erratic, with him being very intense, telling me how beautiful I was many times, and kissing me a lot. But apart from that, everything was going well. I mentioned that I was addicted, and that if he went home, he would probably not feel the same for me after a few drinks. I decided to go home with him anyway. He lived with his family. We did, and that was all. I lost all interest in him during the following days. I informed him of this since he kept sending me messages constantly, sending me selfies doing worldly things like smoking and long messages about dreams in which I appeared. I felt a little stifled and told him that I needed space since my feelings for him had disappeared. He kept telling me that he thought he was very friendly and that he was good with himself. The next day at work, his breaks coincided with mine, and he continued to address me all day, making trivial and meaningless conversations. It was a bit annoying, but at the end of the day, after having sent me messages while working and having feared to see him and have to endure more of those awkward conversations, I was already fed up. Later that day, Rob was waiting outside the building when I finished working. Normally, on the way home, I would go with some coworkers, but that day, Rob approached and made a small, uncomfortable talk with me. It was already so painful that I lied, telling him that I had to go to the bathroom. I entered the building and made sure he was no longer there. I was already stressed, and he noticed, mentioning that he felt anxious. This was perhaps the 5th time I heard him say that, so I showed myself remarkably fed up. He also asked me again if I was fine, and I sent him messages to which I replied, "We will talk about that later," since there was a group of people next to us. There was a finality to these problems that led him to allow being so uncomfortable. "How was your night? Was something wrong? I hope not. You are a good person, blah blah blah." I received lost calls from him at that time. I told him again that with my move plans, the personal problems I had, and my intimacy problems, I found myself in a precarious situation, and he was being too insistent. What I was going through was overwhelming, and we had to talk so much. He answered me with a long message saying that he understood the situation and that if I wanted him to stop approaching me at work and stop sending messages, he would. I told him that I needed space. During the following 13 days, I received 6 messages from him. The typical messages were, "Be kind to yourself. If you ever need to vent, I am here to listen to you. I hope it is not a nuisance. I sent you a message as a positive statement, random drawings of venom that I had made, and again, I know kindly with you." At that point, I had already had enough and sent him a firm message. I can add the exact message later if someone is interested, but basically, I told him that I did not want to pursue a relationship with him, romantic or otherwise. He answered me, saying that it was not a good time for him since he was dealing with an important depressive episode, but that from that moment, he would be a ghost for me since I only had a few weeks left in the company. But in reality, my situation has changed, and now I will stay longer. He again told me to be kind to myself, and I thought that it would be everything. But he often posted publicly on the network about my problems with addiction and intimacy. My profile is very personal since I am a very open person. He had shown Rob something that I had published. Anything relevant was about a dream that I had, what it meant, and I had access to my username since we started talking. About 2 weeks after cutting contact with him, I received an answer on something that I had published on Ask Reddit, detailing how that person had big problems with addiction and that he could no longer handle it. This was not relevant to the question he had asked, and I immediately knew that something was wrong. At first, I thought it could have been someone who knew me, but after a few minutes, I fell into the account, and it was Rob. Rob had accessed my account by reviewing more than 100 previous messages and using the information I had from my previous publications to try to understand my mind and somehow infiltrate my life again. At the beginning, I thought I was crazy, but without going into details, it was confirmed that it was Rob. Surprised me a lot. It seemed too strange to be true, but then I did not feel anything. I did not know what to think at that moment. I talked to my friends about this, and everyone thought that the situation was really disturbing. I mentioned it in my group therapy, and they told me that Rob was a stalker and that I had to inform the company where I worked, in case something happened to someone else or me. Following this advice, I spoke with my manager, the manager of my manager, and finally with human resources. Without giving names but looking for orientation, they told me that I could talk to someone about human resources or that I could use someone from HR as an intermediary if I wanted. I am not sure how I feel. It has been a roller coaster. At first, I felt nothing, and I thought I was making a big drama out of something insignificant. Then I began to feel severe anxiety. I decided not to apply for a position that I would have requested otherwise since I was in his contract. I had dreams in which he did horrible things to me and constantly looked around the building to see if he was close. One day, walking home, I was even afraid that someone was following me. This has calmed down a little. I am not sure if it is the result of trying to avoid the situation or if I am not afraid, but I still have flashes of that. Coincidentally, his breaks began to coincide with mine recently. Could be a genuine coincidence, but I know for Gary that they choose their own breaks, and mine are always the same, which he knows. He steals my time and has begun to try to approach me. He even asked a girl that I know and also works with him about me. I hardly talk to that girl. I even put Go Rob as a username in my account. This is crazy. I am not sure what the resolution of this will be. The official path seems scary for me. There is still a part of me that thinks that I am exaggerating and making a big scandal out of nothing. However, if he makes a movement that is out of place, I think I would consider asking one of my friends to speak with him. My therapy group says that his obsession will only grow, and since I will now be in the company permanently, I think that definitely I should do something about it. I suppose that I am only looking for some external perspective as well as an opportunity to vent and clarify my mind. This incident took place 4 years ago, but the memories are as vivid as if it happened yesterday. I recounted the story to a friend shortly after it occurred, when everything was still fresh in my mind. At the time, I was living in a new state and eager to socialize with other singles, so I created an online dating profile. It was through this platform that I met a man named Justin, who had also recently moved to the area. We hit it off and decided to have dinner at a local bar. The dinner was enjoyable, and Justin was a delightful companion. Tall, over 2 meters, and very engaging. He stood out among the urbanites of the city, and I was already looking forward to seeing him again. After dinner, we took a short walk, and he invited me back to his house for some drinks. Having never seen a basement before, I was intrigued. While he prepared the drinks, we retreated to his room, where we sat on the bed discussing his experiences in the army. Although Justin was pleasant, he began to press me to drink more. As I raised my glass to take a sip, I noticed a strange residue at the bottom. When I questioned it, he dismissed it, saying he'd only used the glass for water. The drink was incredibly bitter, and my instinct was to refuse it, but he insisted, so I took small sips, trying not to appear suspicious. I asked him if he had ever killed someone during his deployment, and his face lit up with a joy that was unsettling. He detailed his experiences with a disturbing relish. He also mentioned doing things at his home in Montana where the law doesn't always reach. I began to feel dizzy and decided to stop drinking, but the situation took a darker turn when he shared his greatest fantasy: to kidnap a woman, keep her as a slave, and then kill her. His words sent chills down my spine, and I knew I had to get out of there. I felt my phone's battery dying and began to devise an escape plan. With my small stature, I knew I couldn't overpower him. When I sensed his roommates had left, I used the last of my battery to send a message to a friend, hoping it would be enough to ensure my safety. Justin offered to take me to my car, and I felt an immense relief when I saw it parked outside the bar. I drove around to make sure I wasn't being followed and promptly blocked all of Justin's contact information. I hoped that by ignoring the incident and moving on, the fear would subside. However, the feeling of being watched persisted, and I found myself constantly on edge. I remember the early years of school as a sort of bubble. I was a quiet girl, preferring to observe the world from the sidelines rather than participate. I liked feeling invisible, as if not attracting attention would protect me from malicious looks and hurtful comments. However, that protection was illusory, for even those who try to be invisible are seen by those seeking someone to target. The problems began around the age of 12 when being different made me the target of teasing. At first, there were small, insignificant comments that others might not have noticed. Why do you always wear your hair that way? Or, that shirt is out of fashion, or your parents don't buy you new clothes. These small comments soon escalated into a daily routine of humiliations. The worst part was that the teasing seemed to be escalating, as if they were testing each other, pushing the limits of how far they could go with me. There was a girl named Emily who led this group. She was not just popular, she was feared. Everyone knew Emily had a sharp tongue and a disturbing ability to manipulate others. Sarah and Megan were her faithful followers, two shadows that accompanied her everywhere, echoing every word she said and laughing at each insult she threw. I always knew they didn't hate me for who I was, but because they needed someone to belittle to feel superior. That didn't make the days at school any easier. It became a constant battle between fear and resignation. I walked through the halls with my head down, trying not to draw attention, especially from them. But it was futile. No matter how careful I was, I always found myself in their sights. When they couldn't get to me in front of others, they would wait for me in the bathrooms, empty halls, or after class. There was an incident during a physical education class that I'll never forget. I'm not particularly athletic, and I was always behind in Emily's exercises. I stumbled during a race, and without hesitation, she began to imitate my clumsy movements, exaggerating each gesture while Sarah and Megan laughed along with the others. The teachers, seeing what happened, did not intervene. They just joined in the mockery, dismissing it as just girls being girls. But for me, there was nothing funny about it. As the months passed, something inside Emily changed. I don't know if she got tired of the verbal teasing or if she simply wanted to take things further. But one day the harassment escalated from words to actions. I remember an afternoon at the end of class when I saw Sarah holding the straps with a mocking smile on her face. "Not so fast," she said before Megan could react, and pushed me against the classroom wall. It wasn't a strong push, but it was enough to make me lose my balance and hit my elbow. I was paralyzed, looking at Emily, who watched from a corner with her arms crossed, seemingly enjoying the scene. Sarah let me go, grabbed my arm tightly, while Megan blocked the door. Fear seized me. I knew something had changed inside me. I knew that if I didn't do something, things would only get worse. With all my might, I pushed Sarah and ran towards the door, barely escaping their laughter as I ran down the hall with tears in my eyes and my heart racing. But although I had managed to escape physically, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. I had learned to read the atmosphere, to know when to be more alert. There were days when I could feel Emily's hatred in the air, days when I knew something was going to happen. But nothing prepared me for what happened that October afternoon. That day, the tension was palpable from the first class. I felt Emily watching me with an unusual intensity. Each time our eyes met, she smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was a smile loaded with malice, as if she was planning something. At the end of the day, as everyone began to collect their things to go home, I felt a little more relieved. I thought maybe it had only been my imagination, that everything had been an exaggeration in my head. I decided to go to the bathroom before leaving. I had a strange sensation in my stomach, but I tried to ignore it. It was then that I realized Emily, Sarah, and Megan were behind me. I entered the bathroom, trying to act normally, but I felt a panic surge when I heard the door lock behind me. I was alone with them. My heart began to beat rapidly. Without thinking, I got into one of the cubicles and quickly closed the door. I stayed there, listening to their laughter outside. I was trapped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. I waited for them to leave, but when I opened the cubicle door, there they were, smiling in a way I'll never forget. Emily was the first to speak. "Really? You thought you could escape from us?" There was something in her tone that sent a chill down my spine. Before I could react, Sarah pushed me to the ground, hitting my head against the cold bathroom tile. The pain was instant, but I had no time to process it before Megan pounced on me, delivering a barrage of blows. I tried to shout, but each time I did, I received another blow. My vision began to darken, and my last thought before losing consciousness was that I was going to lose my life. I woke up in the hospital, disoriented and in shock. The first thing I saw was my grandmother sitting next to my bed, her eyes filled with tears. My body was sore, and every movement reminded me of the brutality of that day. My mother was in the room, arguing with a doctor, but I could barely understand what was being said. My head was filled with a constant buzzing, and everything around me seemed blurred. It took several days before I could fully grasp what had happened. My mother had gone directly to the school after the incident, demanding answers and justice, but all she found was indifference. The school administrators refused to take real measures, claiming there were not enough witnesses and that they couldn't punish the girls without conclusive evidence. They were essentially saying that what had happened to me didn't matter. In her despair and anger, my mother decided to take justice into her own hands. I don't know what time it was that she lost control, but what she did later left everyone in shock. She was arrested shortly after and spent 5 days at the police station while I was still at the hospital trying to recover. My grandmother stayed with me during all that time, trying to comfort me, but the truth was that no words could repair the damage that had been done. Despite what the girls had done to me, they never faced real consequences. The school refused to take responsibility, and they continued their lives as if nothing had happened. The feeling of impotence that I had felt was something that stayed with me for years. I couldn't understand how something so horrible could have happened and that those responsible didn't pay for it. That feeling of injustice, that the world was simply not a fair place, stayed with me. I tried to return to school and move forward with my life, but everything had changed forever. During my days in the hospital, the silence was almost unbearable. It was no longer the physical silence that surrounded me, but the emotional one that came from the people who should have defended me, from the school that should have protected me. They knew my mother had done something extreme, but I couldn't blame her. She was as desperate as me, and in her own way, she tried to do justice where the system had failed. No one else seemed to care or be willing to take action. My mother's rage that led her to do the unthinkable made me realize how alone I had been throughout the months of harassment. I always thought that eventually, someone would notice what was happening, that the adults who were supposed to take care of us would intervene before something bad happened. But I was wrong. They ignored the signs, ignored my silent pleas until it was too late. At home, my mother didn't speak much after leaving jail. I knew her well and knew that behind her apparent calm, she was still furious. Not with me, but with the system, with the school, with those adults who had failed their daughter so much. But she didn't know what to tell me. The conversation was always the same. We did what we could, Amanda. We did everything that was in our hands. But we both knew that the truth was much more bitter. Despite the physical scars from the attack that took a while to heal, the deepest wounds were not visible to others. My mind had become a battlefield. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of Emily, Sarah, and Megan laughing as they hit me. I heard their laughter, felt the cold of the bathroom floor, and relived the paralyzing fear that had taken hold of me that afternoon. I couldn't sleep without the nightmares coming back, and if I managed to fall asleep, I woke up drenched in sweat, terrified of going back to school. My mother tried to convince me that I had to go back to school, that I couldn't let those girls beat me. But how do you face someone who is afraid to leave their house, afraid of walking through the same halls where they were brutally attacked? Every corner of that school was filled with dark memories that I preferred to forget, but that were engraved in my memory like an indelible scar. I remember the day I finally decided to return. My grandmother accompanied me in the car because my mother was still forbidden to approach the school. On the entire trip, my aunt strongly felt that I was suffocating because the air wasn't enough. My grandmother, who had always been my rock, tried to stay calm, but even she knew it was impossible. When we arrived, the doors of the school seemed gigantic, monstrous. My body refused to move. I tried to walk through the halls as if I didn't care, as if nothing had happened, but every time I saw a group of girls laughing, My mind went back to that bathroom, to those blows, to that terror I had experienced. I couldn't concentrate in class. I couldn't listen to what the teachers were saying. All I heard was the echo of those cruel laughs in my head. Emily, Sarah, and Megan were still there, of course. Although they didn't come close to me, their look said everything I needed to know. They had no remorse. They felt no guilt. For them, I was still an easy victim, someone they could destroy if they wanted to. They looked at me with a mix of amusement and superiority, as if they still controlled the situation. And somehow they did. I had lost all control over my own life. My fear had become their greatest victory. The following months were a long internal battle. Therapy became part of my routine, but nothing seemed to help enough. Talking to a stranger about what had happened, about my fears and my trauma, made me feel even more vulnerable. It was like by talking about it out loud, I was reliving it all again. But the worst thing was facing the reality that the girls who had done this to me had not received any kind of real punishment. They were going on with their lives while I was trapped in an endless cycle of fear, nightmares, and anxiety. My mother didn't stop fighting, even after her arrest. She kept insisting to the school, sending letters, calling, demanding answers, but the answer was always the same. There is not enough evidence. We can't do anything without witnesses. There was a general helplessness in the air, a feeling that nothing would change. Justice in my case seemed like a distant dream. There were days when I felt so overwhelmed I couldn't get out of bed. My grandmother would come to see me. She would sit next to me and stroke my hair, whispering to me that everything would be okay, even though neither of us believed it. It wasn't just the physical pain that stopped me. It was the weight of everything that had happened, the certainty that my life would never be the same. Despite everything, over time, I managed to finish school, although I was never the same. Emily, Sarah, and Megan finished their senior year without anyone bothering them, without anyone getting in their way. And although I tried to move on, the trauma was still a constant shadow that loomed over me. I couldn't walk alone without feeling like someone was following me. Every time I saw a group of girls laughing, my body would tense up and fear would paralyze me. Even years later, when I had left school behind, the fear was still there, like an old friend that I couldn't get rid of. I couldn't walk through a bathroom without my mind going back to that afternoon, without feeling the cold of the floor beneath my body. My mother, for her part, never forgave the school or the directors or those girls. Although she had spent time in jail for what she did, she never regretted it. I did what I had to do, she used to say. If they weren't going to protect you, I would. And although a part of me understood, another part felt guilty. My mother had suffered because of me. She had gone to extremes because the system had failed, and I couldn't help but feel that somehow this was all my fault. Today, I am still dealing with the aftermath of that experience. I still have nightmares. There are still days when fear takes over me for no apparent reason. But the hardest thing to accept has been the injustice of it all, knowing that the people who did this to me moved on without consequences while I am still trapped in that bathroom, in that moment of terror. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can hear their laughter, but they don't hurt me in the same way now. When I hear them, I remind myself that I survived. I survived something that could have destroyed me, and even though I'm still healing, even though the wounds still hurt, I know I'm stronger than they ever thought I'd be. I survived, and that, in the end, is what matters most. I met Javier briefly through a friend at a concert where his band was playing. We spoke, but I gave him a hug as I was leaving because I'm a friendly person, and he was close to my best friend, Harvey. Maybe it was a mistake. I should have ignored him that night or at least maintained superficial politeness. I no longer smile at strangers or act overly friendly with anyone, and this is part of the reason. A few days later, he sent me a message. We talked for a bit, and it was nice, but 2 weeks later, he told me he was falling in love with me. Maybe this should have been a red flag, but I tried not to think about it too much. He was a sensitive bassist in an indie pop band. Of course, he was a hopeless romantic and was also very innocent and somewhat childish. When I told Harvey what Javier had told me, he advised me to be kind when rejecting him since his father was schizophrenic, his mother was an alcoholic, and Javier himself was on the autistic spectrum. which made him become easily attached to people due to his difficult upbringing. I understood this since I have borderline personality disorder, and I empathized with her quick attachment to me. Anyway, I told her that I wasn't ready to date anyone. This wasn't a lie. I was actually mourning the recent death of a boy I was friends with and liked. I didn't tell him this, so it was nice to see that he accepted my rejection calmly. Over time, our conversations dwindled until we stopped talking. A year and a half later, he wrote me again. We had the same relationship before, and this time, he did not make any love confessions, at least at the beginning. A few weeks later, one of his friends asked me if I wanted to go out with him. I already felt comfortable with the idea. I was not friendly and sensitive, something that I thought I needed since I normally attract strong types of themselves and somewhat arrogant. The only problem was to coordinate our agendas. I was already in the university, very busy with the work of my last year. But he said that he would wait until my workload would decrease. Although I had no feelings for him, he understood if he had found someone new if he thought that person was better and did not want to go out with him. Where this came from, I had not told him anything about new friends and had not published anything to indicate that I had met another boy. Suddenly, I felt very uncomfortable. Laughing at him, I asked why I suddenly had these doubts. He told me that he felt that I was simply thinking about things too much. Again, when he had told me that he loved me 2 weeks after knowing me, I tried to let it pass, but I really stayed on guard. I don't like dependent people who suffocate me with their attachment. Everything culminated a few days ago, more than ever, with upcoming trials and exams. It surprised me when Javier sent me a message telling me that he would be here in a week and wanted to leave an appointment. I told him that unfortunately I could not, as I had too much to do. Immediately, he assumed that this meant that I was no longer interested in him. With annoyance, I asked him why he acted so right and why he assumed that just because I wanted to concentrate on finishing this quarter with good grades, it suddenly meant that I no longer liked him. He quickly apologized but was still angry. I went to sleep without answering. When I woke up, I turned on my phone and found what millions of notifications looked like. All were messages from them. 26 of them were practically a novel. Some extracts said, "Move on, there are better people out there. I have been only for so long now. Now I am a cynical. I hate this planet. You need someone who is happy. I do not compare me with your intellect. One day you will get bored of me. I feel that I know you, although we have only seen each other once. You do not know me. Do not know anything about me because you have never tried to meet me. You only know the image of me that you created in your head." He also said, "There is something really bad in me, which is another reason why you should get away. I am not a bad person. I am only crazy. Mental illness is not an excuse to do things like each woman who has rejected me. I thought I was cursed because my father told me that our family was for a potential racist African Gitan song that said it was about me. Although I told him to leave me alone, he continued to belittle and try to manipulate me, saying, I will probably die just for things like this and ruin anyone with my authorship behavior, and this jewel. I already tried to end my life, and you can't hate me more than what I hate myself. Maybe because we live in a world after Elliot Rodger and that girl who sent 65,000 messages to her Tinder appointment, and in one of them said that she wanted to bathe in her blood. I told Harvey what Javier had done, and he was furious, but his anger was due to major reasons. One night during the period in which I was in contact with Javier, Harvey and I went to bed, mainly due to my bad mental state at that time. In February, I received a furious message from Javier. Happened with Javier and sent him screenshots of the messages. I needed time to process. What I did not know all that time was that Javier had confronted Harvey about the situation with me and had given him advice. Javier never told Harvey that he was interested in me and instead acted behind him while he was his shoulder in which to cry. Even worse, Harvey told me that in February, Javier asked him, what would he do if one of his friends were dating with me? Harvey confessed that Javier would destroy him, that he would never try anything, but of course, he did exactly that several months later. To find out all this, he put on chicken skin and started questioning some things. He confronted me about Harvey to get angry and create a gap between us, or it was to obtain information from me. He had been orchestrating and planning all this for months before trying to revive our friendship. Harvey said something that made me believe that Javier tried to manipulate this situation months in advance. According to him, Javier told him that I had said something very cruel and hard, which caused Harvey to have a nervous breakdown and doubted all his relationships. Something so bad that he could not even repeat it. I know with certainty that I never told Javier anything that has not told Harvey, and although I said some unpleasant things to Harvey, it was never something that would take him to the limit, which means that Javier made up this little information. I have blocked Javier and everything, but I am still afraid that he can lose control and do something dangerous. Last night around 2:30 a.m., I experienced something that I never want to encounter again. I'm also seeking advice on whether I should be as frightened as I currently am. Let me start by saying that I don't live in the best area. It's not rife with crime, but I don't feel at ease with any of the people, including the security guards who spend a lot of their time sleeping. In my hometown, in my apartment building, last night I was preparing for bed. I turned off my TV, air conditioning, and so on, and my living room was completely silent. I was sitting on the couch when I heard people talking, seemingly from the back balcony next to us. Living on a high floor, it's not unusual for sounds to easily penetrate through our windows, but I had never heard anyone so clearly before. I continued playing with my phone, but I began to feel uneasy because of the tone in which the most talkative man spoke. From what I could gather, there were two men, one older and one younger. I distinctly heard the word rescue, which caught my attention. This is something I heard after I started listening carefully. She wouldn't be looking for me. She knows you. This rescue was supposed to happen tonight. Can still happen. This point was reiterated several times. At 5 in the morning, the place feels like The Walking Dead. People start checking their doors. There is no security in any of the buildings at that time. I heard fragments of them talking about a neighbor who was walking by after showering, and an older man telling a younger one, "I didn't fight with her while you were gone. Next week, buy her a bottle of wine, get drunk, it's yours." Then the young man responded, "I'm not going to do that." This seemed particularly strange to me, especially if it was referring to a woman in whom the younger man was interested. Why would he mention getting drunk alone? My initial paranoid thought was that this woman might be meant for the younger man, if that makes sense. It all ended strangely when the older man, who I learned lives in a flat below mine, came up to my flat and started banging on my neighbor's door. I called security, who came up, and I heard the older man mention that it was my neighbor's dog, but I didn't hear any barking at all. So, I'm not sure why he needed to bang on that door at 3 in the morning. Now, I'm terrified to leave my apartment. Since I leave early, it seems like these creepy neighbors might be planning something involving a rescue or worse. What do you think? Do I have reason to worry?